In recent years in the UK and in Europe, Western Europe in particular, there's been a lot of talk about migrants, migration, and how a lot of cultural shifts have taken place in society as a result of importing a lot of people from very different cultural backgrounds into the countries. Focusing on the UK, one concept that seems to be gaining in popularity is this idea of remigration, which is basically a nice way of saying deportation. I find that a lot of right-wing people just suggest deportation as a solution to all of the problems that they see in front of them. Any problem they see with Muslims, any problem they see with black people, basically anybody who doesn't look white, they suggest deportation. Even extending it to white people, by the way, who aren't Anglo-Saxon. Now, putting aside their ignorance of history and how the white people in the UK themselves actually comprise of many different groups of people from many different time periods, I just think this is a really dumb idea. Deportation, and especially deporting masses of people, and we're talking millions of people, is logistically, in my opinion, not really feasible. Now, this is where people will disagree with me and say, well, if you really put your mind to it, I think we could actually make this happen. But for me, I think it's quite a harsh policy. It's inhumane. And again, it's just logistically such a difficult thing to do in terms of time, in terms of expense, in terms of, I guess, the physical struggle you'll encounter trying to deport people. And what kind of a country is going to do something like that? What does that say about a country if it's going to deport large numbers of its people just because it doesn't like them? To me, it just doesn't make any sense. And we see these political parties like the Homeland Party that are coming up now, which have this as their central policy plank in terms of how they're going to deal with all of these problems. Deportation. I almost said remigration there, but it's deportation, that's what it is. Literally kicking people out. And aside from the logistical challenge of doing something like this, I mean, I haven't even reached the ethical side of it. Ethically, I don't agree with it. But I don't even have to go that far. Logistically, it doesn't even make sense. But there's actually another element to deportations which a lot of people don't really talk about, which is, if you think about why people are wanting to deport people of minority backgrounds, it's because they think those minorities are never going to be able to integrate into Britain and be British. This is where I disagree for two reasons. Number one, that's just an assumption and it's speculation. And as much as there's evidence to suggest there are a lot of people who don't want to integrate, there are actually a lot of people who would want to integrate and who do integrate. Secondly, and this is the more important reason, a more compelling vision for the future of the country, any country actually, is one in which every person in that country can feel enfranchised, can feel as if they're a part of that country, that they're a part of that society, and that it means something to them. And that includes the people who would come from abroad to become members of that country. That kind of a country is a country that's going to succeed because it's going to be able to attract immigrants who will be able to come and integrate and then contribute to the nation. I think for a long time, Britain has actually been that country. I think a lot of European countries have been those countries. What's happened is that governments have failed to tackle the social challenges that have arisen as a result of people from different cultural backgrounds living together, and there being poverty, there being economic issues, political issues. They've just failed to handle these things. It's not because we have people of different backgrounds living together. That itself is not the problem. The problem is the failure to handle integration properly. This is where I think multiculturalism has failed, because multiculturalism is simply saying we have multiple cultures living next to each other. It's almost this sort of passive system where if we just put people next to each other, they'll hopefully figure it out and everything will work. And it will just be this beautiful diversity garden we can look at. And I disagree with that. I think multiculturalism is actually the wrong approach, and we should be focusing on interculturalism, which is what all these people from different backgrounds have in common and how we can come up with an integrated culture that integrates elements of all these different people's cultures. Because that's the most compelling vision for a country and its future. And it's a vision which welcomes everybody. And it's a vision that the world can look up to, actually. And there are countries that genuinely try to integrate all of their peoples. A good example is Singapore, right? They have this policy of making sure that all the races and religions respect each other, and they've always been a multiracial, multi-ethnic country, and that's just how they operate. And it works really well because they really emphasize this point, and the government ensures that this idea, this concept is permeating all of society through and through. Whereas in the UK, the government's just allowed things to run riot. So now we have segregation, de facto segregation in some areas, basically, faith schools, which again is segregation. And we don't really consider the fact that given that 10% of the population are non-English, non-white English, we basically ought to be talking about how we can integrate everyone's cultures. Of course, you could just deport people and turn back time, so to speak, to this previous version of England where there aren't any brown people on whatever. But again, I think ethically that doesn't make sense. Logistically, it doesn't make any sense. It's not even possible in my opinion. And it's not even the most compelling vision for the future. That's not a country that's looking to the future. Now, as I say this, as I talk about interculturalism and forming a new integrated culture and a set of values around it, I'll concede that this does mean that the Britain of the future will necessarily feel different to the Britain of the past because you've just got a different set of people. But I personally believe it will be an even better version because it's going to have this ability to integrate all these different people. And I think that's what people should be focusing on. And that's how we're really going to solve all of these societal issues that are a result of multiple cultures and ethnicities. That's the only way we're going to solve it.